Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Demai, Chapter 1, Halacha 4. This shiur is dedicated to the elevation of the souls of the 45 people who perished in Meron the other day, almost all of them from the Haredi community. The Mishnah is going to talk about other areas of Demai that are treated leniently. By the way, in the art scroll, we're on 11a2. The Mishnah has a lot of very interesting topics that you can get an idea that Demai is going to be lenient. One of the reasons that Demai could be treated very leniently is because at this time, when Yohanan Kohen Gadol made this ruling, the laws of the separations were going to be d'Rabbanan. Why? Because the majority of the Jews in the Olei Bavel were still outside of the land. And we know that when the majority of the Jews are in the land, the laws of Trumos and Maasros are going to be Doraita. And I think at this time it's going to be d'Rabbanan, and then it's going to be a leniency on it on top of that. And I think that's going to be what's happening. We covered this before when we're looking at this. The question is Demai going to be looked at as questionable tevel, or is it going to be looked at as a rabbinic requirement? And Rabbi Yosei answered that for us earlier in chapter 1, where we're not looking at the Demai as questionable tevel. We're looking at it as a rabbinic, a set of rabbinic ordinances. And we saw earlier that if we were treating this like questionable tevel, then none of these rulings would be lenient at all. And one of the issues over there is that if you had it where, okay, the Truma Gedola was separated out, and now you've separated out the Meiser Rishon, if you did not separate out the Trumas Meiser from the Meiser Rishon, then you're stuck with Tevel. And that would be a big problem, and there'd just be no leniencies in any of this. And we have this question, Rabbi Yosei answers this earlier, and he's saying, no, this is going to be a rabbinic system of restrictions. It's not going to be treated as all of this pile for Demai treated as questionable tevel. And I think that comes into some of these leniencies that are coming up. So keep in mind that this is going to be on the side of being rabbinic, and it's not going to be on the side that one may think that this is going to be questionable tevel. It is not. The Mishnah says with regards to Demai that we may make an erev with it, and we may make a shetuf mevuot with it. Now, one of the ideas about making an erev is with it, and why is this coming up with Eruvin? Well, this is coming up because we're talking about merging courtyards, and this is going to be before Shabbat, and families in a courtyard, and in the case of the shetuf, is going to be like two neighbors, and they're going to use a piece of food in order to create where they can carry things. And normally, if you have bread of Demai, what they're saying is that you can use this to make an erev. That's a big deal because, and this is novel. This really is a novelty because if you had forbidden food, you can't take the forbidden food and use it to make an erev or to use it to make a shetuf. So if you had something that is going to be not allowed to be eaten, for instance, you have a courtyard of Yisraelim and Levim. You can't take a piece of Trumos and then put that out to make an erev for that courtyard. Why? Because nobody can eat it. Part of the point is that it has to be able to be eaten. And if it's considered to be forbidden food to these people, and in this case it is forbidden food, then you can't use it as an Eruv. This is also going to be talking about where the Demai is going to be lenient, and you can make it an Eruv. Now, if this was going to be questionable tevel, or you were taking something that, it's questionable whether it could be eaten at all, since it's forbidden to be eaten, then you can't use it to make an Eruv. In other words, you can't take tevel and then take the tevel to use it to make an Eruv. Why? Because it's forbidden to be eaten. You can't eat it. Because you can't eat it, you can't use it to make an Eruv. Now, if this Demai were treated like questionable tevel, then it also would be ruled strictly, and you would not be able to use it for an Eruv. But over here, we're seeing that the Demai is treated leniently, and because of that, it means that it is permitted to eat, and it is permitted to be used for an Eruv. It means that it is not being treated as suffix tevel. That's an important point, and we're showing that we're showing sort of this like status of Demai in general, and we're because you might think like when you sit down, you start looking at Demai that this is really you really have like maybe some questionable tevel here. That's not what's going on here, and the laws don't reflect that. That's really what the Mishnah is trying to get out of this. And the Mishnah continues, says we may recite a blessing over this. So if you're going to have, if you're going to eat Demai, then you have to recite, all the blessings, both on the blessing before you eat and after you eat. So if you have a meal that would have Demai, you would say the hamotzi before eating it. So the Mishnah is trying to teach, says the Chazan Ish in Demai 4:16, that although one does not recite a blessing over most other forbidden foods, you do say a blessing over Demai. And this is trying to show that, again, why can you say a blessing over it? Well, if you're a Yisrael and you have, if you have trumos in front of you, you can't say a bracha to eat it. You can't make hamotzi. You can't say the bracha before or after you eat something that's going to be definite trumos, because it's forbidden to you. You're not allowed to go and eat that. This is trying to show that, again, this is very lenient. This is not being treated like suffix tevel. Otherwise, if it were suffix tevel, then you would have a case where you would not be able to say a bracha over it. The Mishnah continues and says, and to join in zimun over it, and we may separate ties from it even when unclothed. Now, we know that a naked person is not allowed to perform any mitzvah that has a blessing, and one of that would be separating out the tithes. So this is trying to teach that even a naked person may not tithe definite tevel because there's a blessing in there, but he may tithe the Demai because there is no blessing in there. And what about the joining in the zimun for that? Well, eats Demai can still join in the zimun. The rationale is that someone who eats a meal containing Demai is going to be saying the blessing. And normally what this is trying to show is that you can't say the blessing over forbidden foods, and so it's not in the status of forbidden food. So you can separate, you can say a blessing over it. So if you could say a blessing over it, you can say zumun over it. That's what this is trying to show. The Mishnah is going to continue and is going to say, and this is a very interesting one, it says that we may tithe it Friday evening at twilight. So this is going to be from Berachot, chapter 1, halacha 1. And legally speaking, we're talking about this in-between time called Ben Hashemashos, which is this time where it's unclear whether night has come. It's a time between where there's 2 stars up, but not quite the third one. And we know that doing malachot on Friday night's a big problem. And you're not allowed to legally separate tithes in Shabbat. You can't physically make a declaration. You can't physically separate the ties on Shabbat. That's breaking Shabbat. So what this is trying to say, and this is a big novelty, is that you may tithe it Friday evening before it's going to be definite Shabbat. And tithing tevel, you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. Why? Because it's like you're repairing something. And in a way you are repairing. You're repairing the pile so that it's going to be able to be used. Just like if you had a kli that had the handles broken off and you were to try to attach the handles on Shabbat, it would be a problem. Why would you be doing that? So that you could use it. Well, you can't eat your tevel. You just can't eat it. And, there's an opinion by the Tanaim that you're not even allowed to get benefit from the tevel. That's an opinion that some of the Tanaim have, which is why you can't plant tevel. Although we go by Rabbi Akiva on it, that it's going to be d'Rabbanan. Nonetheless, there is an opinion, Tanaim, that you can't benefit from it. And so if you're sitting there rectifying this on Shabbat by taking out your ties, you're making this usable. It's like you've repaired it, just like you repaired a kli. And so what's going on over here is that Demai is not going to be treated with this level of stringency like ordinary tevel. It's not going to be treated like definite, like suffix tevel. And so the idea is that most of the Amoratzim are going to be tithing the produce at this time, and they can be relied upon that they separated out the Trumas Gedola, so that it's not actual tevel. And this being so, sages do not view the tithing of Demai to be as great a repair as tithing true tevel. And that's why they're going to allow it in this in-between time when Shabbat is not certain. It's not certain that it has come. And this is going to imply that when that third star is out, that for sure you cannot, I repeat, you cannot separate out your Demai on the Shabbat. But again, in this in-between time, what this is trying to show is, in this in-between time, it's going to be a suffix, and you're dealing with Demai, that's a suffix. And so you have a suffix of a suffix, so they're going to allow that during that time. And the Mishnah is going to continue, and it's going to say, and if he designated its Meiser Sheni before he designated as Meiser Rishon, it's of no consequence. I want to just talk about this real quick. There is a pasuk in the Torah that you are supposed to make your tithes in order. And you have problems that come up if you separate out your Meiser Sheni on a pile of grain that's going to be required d'oraita for separations. And if you're going to separate that out before the Meiser Rishon, one of the problems is that if you take out the Meiser Sheni first, you have diminished what goes to the tribe of the Levim, and it ends up being problematic. So this is trying to say that if this is tithed out of order, then it's of no consequence. That's a very big leniency, because again, you end up with a lot of problems with grain that halachically needs to be tithed on a d'oraita level, and then you're doing the tithes out of order. Namely, the big thing that you're breaking is you're breaking the biblical verse that says to tithe everything in order. So whatever punishment you get for not following that, you get, plus whatever compounds, so that you've diminished from what goes to the tribe of the Levim. Because once you separate out the Meiser Sheni, you can't separate out the Meiser Rishon now, and it becomes a big mess. So you have another ruling of the Mishnah, and it says that the oil that the weavers smear on his fingers is subject to the laws of Demai. This, by the way, is a parallel in Shvius. In Shvius, it's talking about a rule over there in Masechah Shvius where anointing is equivalent to drinking. And so if you rub oil on your body, it's the same as if you drank it. That's one of the nuances in the halacha. We learned that in Masechet Shvius. And so what this is trying to show over here is that, the weaver is going to smear oil on his fingers to protect his fingers while he's weaving. Sometimes the all the friction going and everything else can bother the fingers. So this lubricates the fingers. This lubrication is going to be like drinking in this principle. So what the oil that the guy is putting onto his fingers to weave, that's going to be subject to Demai. Why? Because it's like you drank it. And if it's going to be, where you have, oil that has to be tithed, whether you're going to drink it or you're going to anoint it. And again, this is a type of anointing where you're putting the oil on the fingers for the weaving. This is going to be where it's going to be subject to tithes. However, the Mishnah says, but that which the wool comber puts onto the wool is exempt from the laws of Demai. So this is talking about where the person who is going to be working the wool is not using it on his body. He's putting it onto the product of the wool itself. And that is going to make it exempt from Demai. Why? Because it's like you're lubricating a utensil, and that's going to be exempt. And it's something that, the wool comber is going to put oil into it to make it easier to comb. And it's not going to be where it's like drinking because he's not putting it on himself. He's putting it onto something that's not food anyway. And if it were going to be put onto food, or if he were going to be drinking it, he would have to tithe it. And over here, he is effectively not using it for anything for his body or for eating. And that's why it's going to be exempt from Demai. So the Gemara starts off and it says that we may separate tithes from Demai even when unclothed. And the Gemara explains the ruling, and it says because the act of separating tithes from Demai does not require a blessing. And so the idea is that when you're normally separating tithes from tevel, and it's halachic tevel, then you have to sit there and you have to separate out tithes and you have to make a declaration. And when you're making the declaration, you have to have your clothes on. That comes up in Berachot. In Berachot, you have to be clothed. Now, over here, because you're not making a blessing anyway, you can do it naked. And that's the novelty here. So, since Demai does not require a blessing anyway, this rationale doesn't apply. So, yeah, you can do it naked. Very, very clever to put this in here to understand the ramifications. So what this is trying to teach you by giving you an example that, yes, you can sit there and say these tithes naked. Why? Why can you do it? Because you're not saying a declaration for Demai. It's trying to teach you that Demai doesn't require a blessing. Very clever. The Mishnah stated also that we may tithe the Demai Friday evening at twilight. And this, I think, is a really interesting rule. It comes up in Berachot, chapter 1, halacha 1. And we're talking about what happens if you're doing malachot before Shabbat, between the second star and the third star. It hasn't quite come up. What do you do? Because it's in between time, you're not sure. And over on something that's going to be deraita, a deraita malacha, like, I don't know, plowing or something, right? Or something like, sewing. So, or picking up sticks, or, lighting a fire. So that's definitely going to be forbidden because those are deraita restrictions on Shabbat. You definitely can't do it in this in-between time where it's not sure. By the way, what is going to be the final ruling on this in-between time? Gemara says we'll find out when Eliyahu Nevi comes. So we're not really sure what to do with it, but we treat it stringently on something that's going to be deraita. Now, since Demai is going to be lenient and derabanan anyway, and you're in a uncertain period of time. So again, you have a leniency of a leniency. And so that's why you're going to be able to tithe this at this time. But again, you're not going to be able to tithe it when it's definite nightfall on Shabbat. So the Gemara is going to continue, and it says that the Mishnah's ruling is the same as that which we learned in a different Mishnah. This is going to be in Yerushalmi Shabbos 2:7. And it says, on the eve of Shabbos, if there is a doubt whether it is dark or whether it is not dark, we may not tithe definite tevel, but we may tithe Demai. And this Mishnah is trying to show that it permits tithing of Demai Friday evening at twilight. Now, if we had a pile of Demai, and this Demai were treated as suffix tevel, then you would not be able to tithe this in this in-between time between the second and the third star coming up, that it would have to be treated stringently. So what this is trying to show is that this is really not being treated at all like suffix tevel. And I think that's, part of what they're trying to drill into our head as students to understand the ideas of Demai. And there's going to be another blessing that, by the way, is exempt from Demai, and we're going to cover it in this Gemara. The Gemara says, Rabbi Chalaftia ben Shaul taught in a Brisa that we may deconsecrate Meiser Sheni of Demai in a bathhouse, and that is because the deconsecration of Demai does not require a blessing. So again, you're not allowed to say a blessing in a bathhouse where people are naked. We covered this in Berachot. And the Gemara is basically trying to say that if you're going to deconsecrate Demai, if it were to require a blessing, then you couldn't do this in a bathhouse. And what this is trying to show is that the deconsecration of Demai does not require a blessing. And because it doesn't require a blessing, you can do it in a bathhouse. So that's going to be why you could do it naked or you could do it in a bathhouse, because it does not get a blessing. It's trying to show you this does not get a blessing. So the Gemara is going to continue, and it's going to say, and infer from this, only the deconsecration of Meiser Sheni of Demai does not warrant a blessing, but the deconsecration of definite Meiser Sheni does warrant a blessing. So if you had definite Meiser Sheni, and it's not Meiser Sheni of Demai, it's definite Meiser Sheni, you could not do that in a bathhouse because the deconsecration does take a blessing. You have to designate it. But if it's Demai of Meiser Sheni of Demai, then there's not going to be a verbal declaration on it, so you could do it. It's trying to draw a distinction. And the Gemara is going to examine the ruling, and Rabbi Manna inquires before Rabbi Yudan and says, how does one recite the blessing over the deconsecration of Meiser Sheni? And Rabbi Yudan says that if the fruits that he is deconsecrating, and if he wishes to transfer basically the Meiser Sheni sanctity from the fruit to the money, he recites the following blessing where it says, who has consecrated us with his mitzvahs and commanded us on the redemption of Meiser Sheni. And the Gemara continues and says, but if the money of Meiser Sheni is that he is deconsecrating, in other words, he wishes to transfer the Meiser Sheni money, sanctity from the money to the food, he recites the following blessing where it says, where there's going to be a blessing to Hashem, and it's going to say, who has commanded us on the deconsecration of Meiser Sheni. So this is trying to show us that whether you're going to be deconsecrating it from food to money or from money back to food, that there's going to be a blessing. The blessings are going to be two different blessings, but nonetheless, there's going to be a statement. And this is also trying to show that this kind of statement doesn't exist for Demai at all. So the Mishnah stated that if he designated the Demai's Meiser Sheni before he designates its Meiser Rishon, it's of no consequence. This is a very big Hiddush, and the Gemara is going to analyze this. And the Mishnah states a case where somebody has already transgressed this, and one may not, in the first instance, tithe Demai out of order. So what this is trying to say is that if somebody did it, they did it. And this is trying to show that you can't purposefully do it out of order, but if it's already done, it's done. Now, again, there's a biblical law that you're not allowed to do tithes out of order. And there's a dissenting view about that. Rabbi Ba, the son of Rabbi Chia Bar Va, says in the name of Rabbi Chia, who says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that it is permitted even in the first instance to tithe Meiser Sheni before Meiser Rishon from a pile of Demai. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, that that you can do it with intention. In other words, you can tithe it out of Demai, and it doesn't mean anything. So that's going to be the dissent. And that is basically implying that it's perfectly okay to tithe it out of order. And there's going to be other people that are going to go by the original inference that if it you can't tithe it out of order, but if it's done, it's done. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha and Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi, in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, hold that one may not, in the first instance, tithe it out of order, but if he's already done so, what he has done, and he may nevertheless recite the Meiser declaration. So when tithing, you're supposed to do it in the right order, and that's going to be where you're going to take out the Meiser Rishon first, and then you're going to take out the Meiser Sheni with what's left. And by the way, you have to take out, for the Meiser Sheni, it has to be exactly at what's 10% left. You can't over tithe the Meiser Sheni. So there's a question that comes up from this back and forth. And the Gemara says, what is the law regarding the designation of Meiser Sheni from, which the Meiser Rishon will eventually be designated? And the Gemara says, or the Gemara is implying that, let's say he now wishes to designate Meiser Rishon on behalf of the pile, but he's already done the Meiser Sheni first, and he hasn't done Meiser Rishon now. So it's all out of order. And so, what do you do? Is he allowed to now, redeem the Meiser, the part of the Meiser Sheni and redesignate it as Meiser Rishon? Is he allowed to switch the designation? How do you handle it? What do you do with it? And the Gemara is going to talk about an incident that resolves this. And the Gemara says that the following incident occurred to Rabbi Yosei ben Shaul, and it says that his sharecropper brought him untithed produce of Demai. And he said to the sharecropper, go out and designate Meiser Sheni from the produce. And after the Meiser Sheni has been designated, Rabbi Yosei ben Shaul spoke to the sharecropper and told him, go redeem the Meiser Sheni and redesignate it as Meiser Rishon. In other words, go out and say that this Meiser Sheni is now Meiser Rishon. This presumably is of Demai, right? You can only do that with Demai. That's what this is trying to show. And this Gemara teaches us, says this Gemara, that it is permissible to designate Meiser Sheni, the portion from which Meiser Rishon will eventually be designated. In other words, that one may designate a portion of Demai as Meiser Sheni, redeem it, and then redesignate it as Meiser Rishon. You could never do this, by the way, with definite Meiser Sheni. But what this is saying is that you've taken out from this pile of Demai, Meiser Sheni, you realize that your ties are out of order, and so now you're saying, okay, this is going to be the Meiser Rishon of Demai, and saying that this is allowed. And there's a Gemara that says it's going to be another Amara that's going to basically agree with this ruling. This again is only for Demai. And Ula bar Yishmael says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that a person can exempt his tevel of Demai from all the tithing obligations with only one seah of tevel. And how does he do this? He brings one seah of tevel, he designates it as Meiser Sheni, he redeems it, and this seah is now hulin, that is tevel from Meiser Rishon. And then he redesignates it as Meiser Rishon and designates the entire seah as Trumos Meiser on behalf of the Meiser Rishon that he has in a different location. And we can see that we can redesignate Meiser Sheni as Meiser Rishon for Demai. In other words, they're switching around these ties. Now, that's basically, says the Pnei Moshe, where he's going to be using this same seah for all the ties. And the amount of one seah is just really trying to illustrate that, let's say he has some other measurement, right? And if somebody has a different amount of tevel, it would require a different amount of ties. And the Vilna Goan says about this that Rabbi Yochanan is teaching that one may use the entire seah for all three ties, and he first designates it as Meiser Rishon, Meiser Sheni, and then he redeems it and redesignates it as Meiser Rishon, and then if he wants to give it to a Kohen or a Levi, he can redesignate it as Trumas Meiseros, and then 1/10 on behalf of that self, and then the other 9/10 on behalf of the Meiser Rishon that he has somewhere else. And although you cannot separate ties from one pile of Demai on behalf of another, that would be true if two piles were brought together from two different Amoratzim. But if they were brought together from the same Amoritz, one can tithe from one pile on behalf of another. This is going to be a Mishnah in Demai 5:6, and Rabbi Yochanan is speaking of this kind of case, where you got this Demai from the same Amoritz. And the presumption is that the same Amoritz who, did the ties in the first place of this pile probably used the same procedure to do it on the second pile. And the Gemara is going to present a challenge to Rabbi Yochanan's ruling on this. And the Gemara says that Ula descended from Bavel and related this ruling in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and the sages of Bavel gathered in opposition to him, and Rav Shesis challenges him, but a Baraisa contradicts this ruling, because the Mishnah teaches if one had before him two baskets of definite tevel, and it stated that the maestros of this basket is going to be in that basket, and the maestros of that basket is going to be in this basket, then he does designate the produce of each basket to serve as maestros for the product of the basket. And the product of the first basket will be tithed by the produce of the second basket, and the second basket will be tevel. So over here, this is trying to say that if you have two piles, and if the Amoritz is going to be the same, then the procedure that he used in the first basket is going to be the same as the second basket. But this is trying to show, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that if you did not take it from the same basket, and it's not from the same Amoritz, then you have a problem, because maybe, again, it's Suffolk, maybe the ties were not taken out of it properly. The Gemara continues and says, regarding this case, there's a brisa that teaches that the proper procedure for removing the designated ties, and it says that he separated from the second basket twice 2/10 of 100 seah, which is going to be 40 seah, and their 10th is a 10th of 40 seah, which is 4 seah, and a 10th of a 10th, which is going to be 4 seah, or 4/10 of a seah. So this is what this is trying to say is that normally, under normal circumstances, the amount of produce that is required to fix 200 seah of tevel, where the Truma Gedola was previously removed, that would be 38 seah. Okay? And what this is trying to do is this is trying to say that we have to consider each maestro separately. And in reality, there's going to be 4 maestros that need to be separated in this case. And so what's happening is you have to take the Meiser Rishon on behalf of the first basket, and then you also owe it for the second basket. And so this is going to get into a complicated set of problems on how to. This is going to be one of the deep halachic rectification puzzles that is going to be here, because again, you have four sets of ties going on here. That what you're trying to do is you're trying to redesignate the ties of Demai on behalf of that. So you're trying to take your Meiser Sheni and turn it into Meiser Rishon. But now you have two baskets, and you're trying to do it on two baskets. How do you calculate that? That's what this is going over. And if you go to 12b in the Art Scroll, you'll see an in-depth calculation, and it's going to be a lot of complicated stuff, but worth doing, but very much worth doing, because you're going to learn a lot of the separation math in detail. And the sages put their puzzles in to sharpen the minds of the students. That's what one of the Gemaras in the Yerushalmi says about these rectification puzzles. So if you're in the mood of getting really good at rectification puzzles, this is one of them. And again, you can find it and the answers on Demai 12b, and it will walk you through an in detail way to go through the math of it, so that you can see these four separations, how to rectify it, and then how to do it with two baskets. Now, the Gemara is going to talk about a challenge, and it says that according to Rabbi Yochanan, why must you take out twice 2/10 and let him merely take out 2/10 and designate one of them as Meiser Rishon, the other as Meiser Sheni on behalf of the first basket, and redeem that of Meiser Sheni and redesignate it as Meiser Rishon on behalf of the second basket. So again, this is going to be where this is being done with two baskets, and that's part of the issue here, is that you have these two baskets. Now, the maestros of this basket is going to be in that basket. That's what they're trying to say. And the maestros of that basket is going to be in this basket. So they have to remove from the second basket two sets of maestros in order to fix this. That's what's going to be making it a little bit complicated. And again, these are here to sharpen the minds of the students. So the Gemara does not like... the Gemara is going to challenge Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Hananya says that there, in the case of Rabbi Yochanan, where one designated Meiser Sheni before designating Meiser Rishon, the pile was originally tevel with regards to both Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni, so that even after he designates the Meiser Sheni, the pile remains tevel with regards to Meiser Rishon. So let me explain that. So what this is trying to say is that, if you have a case where, this could be definite tevel, because if you've separated out Meiser Sheni and you didn't separate out the Meiser Rishon, then you don't separate out the Meiser Rishon, but that means that you didn't take out the Trumos Maestros. And so all of that Meiser Rishon that's in there is going to be tevel, because you didn't take out the Trumos Maestros. And that's part of the problem with taking out Meiser Sheni before you take out Meiser Rishon. You've effectively created a pile where it's going to be definite tevel, because you just didn't separate out the ties. Then you have to go back and do a way to fix it, and that becomes very complicated. The Gemara says, but here in the case of the Baraisa, where one designates Meiser Rishon before the Meiser Sheni, that, by the way, is the way you're supposed to do it. Since the Meiser Sheni has already been rectified by the Meiser Rishon, and it's not going to be subject to it, so then the question is, how can you now redesignate it as Meiser Rishon? And what this is trying to answer and ask is to say that if you had a case where Meiser Sheni and Meiser Rishon are going to be tied in the correct order, and the Meiser Sheni is going to be exempt from Meiser Rishon, but when you have the Meiser Rishon and the Meiser Sheni that have been tied out of order, then the Meiser Sheni is now going to be subject to Meiser Rishon. And in the case of Rabbi Yochanan, the Meiser Sheni that's going to be tied before the Meiser Rishon it's still going to be subject to Meiser Rishon. In other words, you're going to get into a problem where the ties were not taken out from the Meiser Rishon properly. And they're basically saying that in this kind of case, the Meiser Sheni can't be redesignated as Meiser Rishon because inside of there are going to still be these ties that go to the Kohanim. It makes it Tevel. And the Gemara is going to conclude this, and the Gemara is going to say, Rabbi Mana said, is not the portion being separated as Meiser Sheni for the first basket Tevel with regards to the Meiser Rishon of the second basket. So what this is trying to answer is that in the case of this brisa, the Meiser Sheni designated on behalf of the first basket is going to be subject to the Meiser Rishon. And although it's not subject to the Meiser Rishon of the first basket, it is subject to the Meiser Rishon of the second basket. And that is because Meiser Rishon can exempt only the basket from whose benefit it was designated. Now, when the Meiser Sheni is going to be designated from within, it is part of the basket that is exempted from the Meiser Rishon. And when the Meiser Sheni is designated from without, it is not part of the basket, and it remains subject to Meiser Rishon. So in the case of the brisa, the Meiser Sheni designated on behalf of the first basket has Tevel until the Meiser Rishon is designated on behalf of the second basket. So in the case of Rabbi Yochanan and the case of the brisa, the Meiser Sheni is subject to Meiser Rishon, and if somebody could redesignate the Meiser Sheni as Meiser Rishon, in the case of Rabbi Yochanan, again, Rabbi Yochanan is saying that these two baskets came from the same Am Haaretz. One should be able to also do so in the case of the brisa, which, by the way, may not have come from the same Am Haaretz. So the fact that one cannot do it in the case of this brisa teaches us that one should also not be able to do so in the case of Rabbi Yochanan. And the Vilna Goan is gonna explain it like this. He's gonna say that from the beginning of the sugya until the Gemara is talking about this brisa, it's gonna try to teach us that if you have two baskets, each containing 100 figs, and declares the maestros of this basket are in that basket, and the maestros of that basket are in this basket, the ties of the first basket, he ties it in the following way. Vilna Gaon, his point is that he takes from the second basket 2 figs, and it's going to be a 50th as Truma Gedola. Then he's going to take 2/10, which will be the Meiser Rishon. And he's going to take one for Meiser Sheni. And then he's going to take a 10th as a 10th, and 10th of each of those portions to separate out as Meiser Rishon and Trumos Meiser. Okay? And so this Gemara is trying to point out that one may not actually designate or redesignate Meiser Sheni as Meiser Rishon. And if one were allowed to do it, the Baraisa would not require the removal of the 2/10. And in the case of this, where it's not being tied properly, where normally you're not allowed to take out and switch around the ties like that. You're not allowed to say like, oh well, I'm just gonna redesignate my Meiser Sheni as Meiser Rishon. But if you have a case where you have definite tevel and is improperly tied, then you can make these redesignations that would be permissible. That's going to be the note of the Vilna Gaon. So in some way, Rabbi Yochanan is right in what he's saying. He's talking about a very particular point where it's going to be the same Am Haaretz, and a case where you had definite tevel that might have been improperly tithed, then you can do these redesignations. But without that, you really can't, because you end up where you're you're creating, first of all, a problem because you've tied that order, and that in itself is a problem in the halacha. It's a violation of the Torah, but you end up where you might actually be having suffix tevel, because the Meiser Rishon is not, it's not being done right. So the Mishnah stated that the oil on the weaver that he smears onto his fingers is going to be subject to the laws of Demai, but that which the wool comber puts into the wool is exempt from the laws of Demai. And the Gemara is going to ask a question, and it says, what is the difference between this one, that's going to be the weaver, and that one, that's going to be the wool comber? And the Gemara answers it, and it says, in the case of this one, the weaver that the oil puts onto him is absorbed into the body. It's going to be absorbed in his fingers. And basically, this ointment is going to be like drinking, and it's going to make it subject to the laws of Demai. But in the case where this one, the wool comber, the oil is absorbed into the wool and not the person's body, and because it's being put into something that's non-edible and not on himself, it's not considered an ointment, and that makes it exempt from the laws of Demai. And tomorrow we're going to go on to chapter 2, and we're going to get into produce grown in Eretz Yisrael and what's going on with the Ole Bavel. So have a great day, and getting into the details of halacha is a worthwhile endeavor. Have a great day.